Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joyce Karam, Editor-in-Chief here at Al Monitor. Thank you for joining us for this timely and insightful conversation. It's been less than a week since the United States and Iran signed a memorandum of understanding, extending the ceasefire and setting a goal of reaching a comprehensive agreement within 60 days. Yet, even after the signing, the ambiguity and fragility of the process have been on full display. Washington and Tehran continue to exchange threats. Israel has voiced its disappointment. The war continues in Lebanon, and Gulf states, where Secretary Rubio is today, are recalibrating their positions. Tangibles for Iran from the MOU have so far included sweeping oil sanctions waiver, reported 6 billion and potentially much more to come in frozen funds release, folding of the Lebanon file into the Iran-US talks, lifting of the US naval blockade. For the US, the MOU has achieved, most importantly, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the promise of nuclear talks, and a promise of a potential deal in 60 days. To help us make sense of everything that's ongoing at a very speedy rate, I'm joined by an outstanding group of experts who have worked on this issue both inside and outside government, or have closely covered the war and its ramifications on both Tehran and Beirut. Ariane Tabatabai is Vice President of Research for Security and Defense at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. She previously served in senior positions at the US State Department and at the Pentagon. She is the author of No Conquest, No Defeat, Iran's National Security Strategy. Ariane, if I can call you Ari, great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Joyce. It's a great pleasure to join you and Mike and Ali.
Thank you. We have Michael Singh. He's Managing Director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He previously served as Senior Director for Middle East Affairs at the National Security Council, and he follows the Iran file very closely, with particular focus on Iran's nuclear program and regional activities. Mike, great to have you on this panel as well.
Great to be here.
Thank you. And we have, he needs no introduction, Ali Hashem, prominent Middle East journalist. He joins us from Istanbul today. He's the author and a senior regional correspondent. He covered the war extensively, this ongoing war from Beirut and Tehran for Al Jazeera, and has interviewed leading officials, including Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Ali, great to see you, great to have you, and I'm glad you're doing well.
Thanks a lot, Joyce, and thanks for being with Ariana and Mike.
Great. So without further ado, this is gonna go for an hour. And we want it to be as conversational as possible. So at any point you want to interrupt, just counter, or if you're in the audience and want to send us a question, please go ahead in the chat at any time in the hour that we have. But to start off the conversation, I'm gonna start with Ari. Ari, it's been 1 week now since the signing. What do you make of what has been achieved? Was this the least bad option for the Trump administration to stop the war? And how would you compare it? You've closely seen and worked on the JCPOA. How would you compare it to the previous agreement?
Thanks, Joyce. Yeah, I'm not actually sure what has been achieved, and I can't say that I can compare this with the JCPOA. I think actually a closer comparison might be what was called the JPOA, or the Joint Plan of Action, which was the interim deal you'll recall, and the rest of the folks on this call will recall, was an interim deal that was a stepping stone toward the JCPOA. It was much more detailed and, in my view, a better deal. Obviously, the set of circumstances are very different today. Iran's nuclear program is different today. we have an ongoing war that is a different sort of scene setter than when the JPOA was negotiated, where the two countries were not in conflict. Um, but I think the MOU is probably better than keeping this conflict going for another few weeks or a few months without clear objectives, without attainable objectives, and with the United States spending billions and billions of dollars, with thousands of lives being impacted, millions of lives being impacted throughout the region, thousands having died already. But I want to, if I may, kind of break down some of the costs and benefits of the conflict and of the MOU and start with a couple of quick observations. One, which is that, in my mind, and I would be very interested in Mike and Ali's thoughts here, this is a deal that was in some version available to us for a while. This was a deal that was available to us without the conflict. Because this deal, it does a lot for Iran. It doesn't do a whole lot for the United States from my perspective. It's a lot of concessions, especially up front from the United States. This is a deal we could have gotten a few months ago, a few years ago, and we did not because we did not think that it would have been a decent deal for us and it would sustainably address the concerns that we have on a whole host of issues with Iran, including its nuclear program. The second quick observation is that if you read the MOU, a lot is unsaid and a lot is vague. And there's typically a reason why these deals are very much written in legalese. They're very specific. They really outline the sequencing of events in a way that this MOU does not. And that to me is extremely concerning. It would be concerning with friends. It's more concerning with an adversary with which we have a history of distrust that has unfolded over the course of 5 decades. And an adversary that has had a history of being deceitful on some of the programs and activities that are covered by this, including its nuclear program. The last quick observation I want to make is that it seems to me that a lot of the language is straight out of the Iranian wish list. That there are things that the U.S. negotiators agreed to, including language on respecting Iranian sovereignty, the two sides respecting, sort of staying out of their internal affairs of one another, language about the withdrawal of forces. All of these things are things that I think Iran was just looking to get and they got, and it's just really difficult for me to see another administration agreeing to this. Okay, with this, let me quickly just talk through some of the pros and cons here.
Very quickly.
The big benefit of this conflict, the big gain, is the degradation of Iran's nuclear program and of Iranian military capabilities. I see that as an operational success. I don't see it as a strategic success because I think that Iran is probably going to rebuild a lot of those capabilities. They're not expensive to rebuild and they're not going to take a long time to rebuild. And by the way, we're paying them to do some of that. But the costs, I mean, there's a long list, right? From depleted munitions, from the thousands of deaths throughout the region, from the damage to installations, the division that has been exacerbated between the United States and Israel, between potentially the Gulf Arabs and the United States. By the way, divisions with our closest allies in Europe as a result of this conflict and its conduct. And now we have in Iran a regime whose leaders were replaced, the kind of aging leaders were replaced by a new guard who are perhaps who are less experienced and probably more radical, I would say, more hardline, more aligned with the Revolutionary Guards. And in a way, we have legitimized them with this agreement, and especially with the president saying a lot of nice things, actually, about the current supreme leader, which is, again, something that I don't think previous administrations would have done in the same way. And all of this just 6 months after Iran conducted one of the largest acts of repression that it has done in decades and decades. So overall, I see this as a deal where the United States is making a lot of concessions, front loading those concessions, and Iran is coming out not really having done a ton.
Mike, I want to go to you just as a both follow-up and your take on this deal. You've written a very good piece in the New York Times arguing perhaps the Trump administration had to do this to reopen the strait, but you also make the point that the nuclear program has been very much weakened at its weakest point. But just for the points that Ari had mentioned, was this deal, did the war need to happen for the US to get an MOU like this? And what's your overall take of the deal?
Well, I think it's pretty clear the war didn't need to happen to get this MOU because as far as I see it, actually, the MOU really is dealing with the consequences of the war itself. I mean, if you look at this MOU, I see it as actually a pretty straightforward transaction, which is we're getting Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which seems as though it has happened. And we're essentially giving them economic incentives to do that. So it's you will reopen the strait, I will lift a blockade and also give you unfrozen assets and sanctions relief. That sort of core trade-off is then dressed up in this idea of a final deal in 60 days on the nuclear issue. Why is the kind of reopening of the strait and lifting the blockade then appended to this nuclear question? It's actually a tough question to answer. And I would say that I think in part it's because to sell the deal politically, I think both sides wanted more. I think the Iranians wanted a narrative of victory over the United States. I think for President Trump, I think there was probably a wariness to do a deal that would look as though it was just addressing the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, because of course the criticism would be, well, the strait was open before the war. And so what is the net sort of accomplishment here? And so making it sound as though, well, this is actually addressing this longstanding issue, I think is part of the political narrative behind the deal. But what I get at in the op-ed you mentioned, Joyce, which is sort of the reason why I think actually the comparison with the JCPOA is not apt, is that nuclear program was significantly set back by last June's airstrikes. And so I would argue that actually coming into this war, yes, there were still elements of the nuclear program that were concerning that maybe we would have wanted to address in one way or another. But actually, the nuclear issue for the first time in a couple of decades was not an urgent threat to U.S. national security. And still today, it's not an urgent threat to U.S. national security, and probably not worth the price that we are talking about paying for sort of these remaining sort of leftover nuclear concessions from Iran, especially when you compare them to the threats that Iran's other capabilities and actions pose to American interests, like the missiles and drones, or like the support for Hezbollah and the other partners and proxies. Those we have seen are quite dangerous and destabilizing for the region. We've seen Iran has a willingness to use those capabilities almost indiscriminately against neighbors. And yet the proposed deal, I should say, doesn't even touch upon those things. And so ironically, where the sort of envisaged deal in the MOU, and I say envisaged because it's not clear to me it will ever actually happen, is most like the JCPOA is in the rhetoric of officials about it. We're sort of talking about, well, if we can just somehow solve this really hard issue, everything will get better between the US and Iran. That was something that I thought came from President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry during the JCPOA, during the 2015 nuclear agreement sort of debate, that a lot of us found, frankly, naive and not very believable. And yet here we are sort of repeating that rhetoric. I should note that sort of rhetoric does not come from the Iranian side. They're not talking about a new era of warm relations with the United States. They're talking about defeating the United States. And so that difference is quite stark.
I mean, both you and Ari have been probably in war games or whatever they do at the White House or a Pentagon before a war. A question that I ask myself, how did the US go to war without just envisioning that the Strait of Hormuz could be closed? Is that a lapse, Mike? Do you see that this just was not considered enough by the administration?
So, I mean, I'll tell you from my point of view, I think there's two things. Number one, in a war game, you always have, someone like me or Ari playing the American president. And the reality is that one thing you can never really control for in a war game are the decisions your own side will make. And so, if you're a military commander going into this, you know what forces are available to you. You don't know which ones you will be permitted to use. And I think that going into this war, it's clear that we imposed upon ourselves significant tactical constraints. You can only use airstrikes. You can only use missile strikes. You can't use ground forces, and the war has to be quite short. We had a ceasefire after a very short amount of time. I have to imagine, I don't know, I should clarify, I have to imagine that our military would have liked to have, had another month or so of bombing of Iran to address the missiles and drones and so forth. I think second, very briefly, I think everyone anticipated that Iran would try to close the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not sure any of us actually anticipated precisely how Iran would do it. I think we envisioned scenarios with mines. That's not really what Iran did. Most of Iran's mines were destroyed early in the conflict. Maybe a scenario with an actual naval confrontation, a ship is sunk or something like that. But this idea that Iran could just use its missiles and drones to deter commercial shipping, to affect the calculus of private sector actors, is not, I think, something that we had a ready response for. Because, the U.S. military can't go to a ship captain and say, hey, strait's open, it seems safe to me, you just go, if they don't want to go. And that was, I think, the problem that there was no military solution for. There was only ultimately a political solution for, at least within the realm of what we were willing to do.
Thank you, Ali. I want to go to you and just clarify. Ali is sitting in a bus, but he was in Tehran during the war. He then went to Beirut. What is the mood there, Ali, looking at this MOU, especially from the new Iranian leadership?
Joyce, I think first thing is that they are, as for the upper leadership, as for the supreme leader, it's clear that he's hesitant to deal with the MOU as something sustainable, as something that he can build on. And that's why in his first reaction to the agreement, he was clear that it's not his decision. Now, some said that he doesn't want to take responsibility or he's not having ownership and he's just throwing it on President Pezeshkian and the others. But according to what I know, yes, he's not among those who are in any way sure that there is going to be a deal. And he's one of those who believe that the war will continue. It's not only him and those around him, because what I understood is that they don't see a possibility that a real deal is going to be reached. This is what the leadership in Tehran is thinking. In a way, I think it's a rational thinking, because given the fact the broad lines you have in the MOU, and given the fact the very huge gaps that are to be addressed with respect to the nuclear program, the halting of enrichment for 10, 15, 20 years, forever, because there are several conditions in this regard. The issue of supporting the so-called proxies in the region, also the issues that are unsaid and unwritten. For example, the missile program, Iran's missile program, that is an essential part of the objectives of this war. We remember that issue. So these are all issues that are actually very difficult to be addressed. And given the fact there are 60 days, I think these 60 days are for both sides days of restocking, resting, and preparing for what's going to come next. Now, what the Iranians gained in this war, because there are a lot of losses, but they also
I was going to
gained
say
in this war.
it looks like a very good deal at the surface of it for the Iranian side.
I mean, yeah, if it's a deal, but this is not a deal. This is an agreement. It's an MOU. So the MOU is interim, as just Ari was saying. It's just like the joint plan of action, the one that announced in Lausanne 2013, a plan of action that is a kind of a preparation for the comprehensive plan of action that is to be announced in 60 days or less than 60 days. So given the fact they know very well what they have and they know what the Americans want, except if the United States is going to give up on major conditions, not only for the United States, but also for Israel. And that's why I think the elephant in the room here is what does Israel think about this whole situation? The White House published or posted a few days ago that this deal was able to bring the Iranians back to the table. Well, they were on the table till the last day before the war. They were Thursday in Geneva, and then Saturday the war happened. It was capable of opening the Strait of Hormuz, but the strait was open. And I think this war gave the Iranians the courage for the first time, because the Iranians were not sure that the closure of Hormuz in the past is going to have a real impact on the war. They were very unsure. This war gave them the chance to try it, to experience weaponizing the strait. And whoever weaponizes the strait for the first time will continue to weaponize it anytime, because it doesn't really need mines. It just needs a guy sitting on one of the hills close to Bandar Abbas with a launcher and hitting any ship passing with a launcher, and that's it. It's over. You close the strait for a day or 2 days or a week. This is how the Iranians right now are thinking about this whole struggle. Now, how this is going to end, this is the big question. And now with Lebanon getting into this, into this loop, the idea of getting the ceasefire in Lebanon for now, because I'm waiting to see what's going to happen tomorrow or I think today, it's the 22nd, yet 23rd. Yeah, the meeting between the Lebanese delegation and the Israeli delegation, because now the ball is in the Iranian side. They are the ones who made this deal, or let me say the ceasefire, and now they're talking about the withdrawal. It's all part of the American-Iranian deal. Are the Lebanese, or is the Lebanese government to be able to take it back? And is Israel going to give some gains to the Lebanese government, for example, promising a full withdrawal? Then this is going to be against the Iranian interest. Then, because I think there's another war already going on in Lebanon. Aside from the military war, there is a war between linking and unlinking Lebanon to the Iranian file, and also neutralizing Lebanon, the Lebanese front, in any future war.
And we will get to that. But you made a point on the leadership in Iran. Ari already had mentioned that this leadership is more hardline, or looks at the surface of it more hardline than the previous one. But signaling, messaging from the White House sort of sometimes flirts with the idea that the president of Iran is more moderate, that these are guys that are pragmatic, that we can work with them. In your assessment, somebody who is in touch with some in the leadership, where did we land with the new leadership after this war?
Well, I think we are dealing right now, or let me say, the world is dealing right now with a more coherent leadership in Iran, especially when it comes to the system, the establishment itself. I'm not talking about the government. Now, President Pezeshkian and Mr. Arakchi in the foreign ministry, they represent the government. But as a system that is taking or calling the shots, I think they're more coherent between and decision-making process is different from the times Khamenei Senior or Ali Khamenei. Now, there is a system similar to a political party that is ruling a country. In the past, there were people elements from several sides. Now, no, there is one complete team that has been there as a deep state for years, played, or let me say, had a simulation during the Raisi presidency, and now they are the ones in charge, military-wise, security-wise, national security-wise, media-wise, culturally-wise. This team is in charge. Yes, there are other ideas in the country, there are other point of views, there are other directions, and there is an exchange that's already taken place. However, the final decision maker here and the whole process is going within a certain group of people that is projecting sometimes some differences and projecting on the other side some agreements. But this is what we have right now. And a younger leader who is more, I think, revolutionary than his father. Why?
More hardline? Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, he is. Now, is he more ideological? I don't know, but yes, he is. He's more hardline. and he is younger and he can take more adventures. He can, kind of initiate more adventures. Because what we saw in the war, Joyce, what we saw in the negotiations is that this leadership in Iran right now is breaking what used to be the rules of engagement and rules of the game. In the past, the Americans or the Israelis will draw the frame, and the Iranians will play within it. Since the first day of this war, on 28th of February, the Iranians went beyond what was drawn. They went beyond the frame, and they started, adopting this madman strategy in attacking everywhere and hitting everywhere. And at the end, closing the strait. All these things, by the way, were part of a playbook, I think, that was there. But no one really thought that it's going to happen, because everyone was used to the old playbook, the playbook of 2020, when Khamenei retaliated to the killing of Soleimani by hitting Ain al-Assad after informing the Americans, or hitting Al-Udeid after the 2025 war after informing the Qataris, or because we have a lot of examples. And this all diminished the Iranians' deterrence over the years. So everyone thought that there is a rational leadership there that is going to prioritize the existence of the state, and that the existence of the states is in tatters or in threat. But for the new leadership, it didn't seem that the existence was the issue that they are going to defend by retreating, however, by attacking.
No, these are great points. Ari, I want to come back to you. In a sense, I mean, you all seem in agreement that, we should be very careful. This is not a final deal. But there are great incentives for Iran if it signs a full deal in 60 days, mainly economic incentives. And knowing what a bad shape the Iranian economy is in now, we've seen the protests that you've mentioned. Why wouldn't Iran sign a nice deal with this administration in 60 days?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there are economic incentives for Iran to take this deal. I think there are also political incentives for Iran to take this deal. To name a couple, the fact that this is probably the best deal they're going to get for a long time, and it is probably a deal that will actually be able to stand the test of time and political transitions in the United States. And this has been a core concern that the Iranians have had for a while. This was a concern they had in the Biden administration when we were negotiating a return to the JCPOA. And they, one of their things was, why would we sign a deal with the Biden administration? Because a Republican may just withdraw from the deal again, and then we're back to the same thing that, we've been dealing with for the past decade. And I think in this case, if we end up with a final agreement signed by President Trump, it's actually likely to stand for a few reasons. One, because even though it will be divisive within the MAGA base and the broader Republican Party, I think that the president has demonstrated that he's able to carry his party forward, and people will ultimately, they might, be quite vocal about it. A few senators have already been pretty public in some of their, criticism of the deal. But I think ultimately they'll go with him. I'll be interested to hear what Mike has to say about this. The other piece of it is that Democrats, I think, even though many Democrats do not like this deal, and for various reasons, not everybody agrees on the why they don't agree with the deal, but I think there is strong disagreement with the deal. I don't know that Democrats will actually, if they regain power in 2.5 years, I'm not sure that they would actually take the steps of withdrawing from it. And so I think that if the Iranians are looking for longevity here, this is probably their best bet at it. The second political piece of it is that they are going to, and they're already framing this as a victory, that the United States, with all of its military might, decided to go and launch this campaign for 3-ish months. And at the end of it, ended up essentially telling Iran, yeah, sure, we're going to withdraw our forces from the region. That might not be actually what happens in practice, but that is the way they're going to present that. They have agreed to terminating all sanctions, which is something that previous administrations would not concede to Iran because of, and I think Mike made this point, and Ali made this point on some level too, that, if we're dealing with just a nuclear program, we never said we will terminate all the sanctions on things like human rights and, support for terrorism and so on and so forth. In the previous administration, and we're doing that now, right? The termination of all sanctions means we're saying, okay, you might be still repressing your people, which they are. There's, reporting just over the past couple of weeks that the repression is continuing, and the regime is using the cover of the war to continue mass arrests and executions and so on and so forth. So none of that behavior is changing, and yet we're saying, sure, we're going to terminate all of the sanctions. I'm not convinced that we will see a final deal. I think that Iran has an incentive to keep this going for a while. Israel, as Ali suggested, gets a vote here, even though they're not really they're not a negotiating party, but they are on the table in some ways, and they are certainly a player who still has agency and has demonstrated that is willing to use that agency to continue to influence things in its favor in this war, and never underestimate the Iranian leadership's ability to shoot itself in the foot and to miss a good opportunity. That is something that has happened in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up, seeing a perfectly good deal and they're like, you know what, just not good enough. So, that is also a possibility.
Thank you. Mike already mentioned the congressional disapproval, even among Republicans, um, of this MOU and the financial incentives given to Iran. Where do you see, how much maneuver room does the administration have in navigating this, specifically before critical midterms in the United States?
It's hard to say, of course, without an actual deal to talk about. And I think that that's, again, worth reinforcing that we are very far from having anything that could be construed as a final deal. And so it's not something that I think a lot of congressmen are going to talk about in the sort of hypothetical, in a sense, especially if that hypothetical requires you to criticize and oppose the Trump administration, if you're coming from a Republican standpoint. Look, from a generic standpoint, though, while you have a Republican president in office who's pursuing a deal with Iran, as Ari said, the generic politics work out well because you would imagine that Democrats largely tend to be supportive of this kind of thing, even if they're critical of this or that provision of it. Republicans would tend to be critical, but they'll be put in a difficult position between sort of opposing a deal they may not like in substance and defying President Trump, which is maybe bad for their political fortunes. I think, though, that that's only sort of in the broadest sense. It's obviously the timing will be quite difficult on the American political calendar if they actually got a deal in 60 days. You're talking about mid-August. Extended for another 60 days, you're talking about mid-October, which may be, even worse. But I think, in a sense, it's hard to imagine they'll actually have that problem. Because when you think about what would actually be involved in hammering out this deal, you would need, for example, to talk about verification procedures. How could you verify that, for example, Iran had frozen its nuclear program in any meaningful sense without a very significant IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, inspection regime in Iran? And Iran today is saying that they've rejected the return of inspectors. You dig up the enriched uranium, the highly enriched uranium. We've all been talking as though you'll find 440 kilograms of 60% highly enriched uranium in Iran. We've all read this story now. Chances are you won't. Chances are you'll find 300 kilograms. What's the procedure for figuring out where's the other 140? And is sanctions relief contingent upon actually doing that? Or do you get it for, having 75% accounted for? So there's so many details to be worked out here on a technical level that we're really talking about something that at best is going to happen next year or even beyond that. And when it happens, it will have to pass first the review of Congress as a deal. That's according to this Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, INARA, which was so important when the JCPOA was under consideration. And then certain actions will require probably separate congressional action. So if you wanted to lift, for example, this or that sanction, as opposed to just waiving it, you would need Congress to act. And so you have to think of this, I think, on a much longer timeline, both to negotiate the deal, and then each step along the way would depend on the exact kind of geometry of politics at the time. I think, though, I mean, I tend to be, maybe I'm a little naive about this. I think the first question is, are people in Washington going to look at it and think it's a good deal? You know, I mean, it has to pass first the smell test. If it looks like a bad deal, it will probably never get to the point of even being voted on by Congress, because you'll have a lot of pressure to say you have to go back to the negotiating table on this. You can't bring this forward and have it be defeated or have it be sort of, dragged through the mud. I'll say one thing on the Iranians. One thing I always caution people about when it comes to negotiating with a regime like Iran's is don't assume that the things that we would think are beneficial to the Iranian regime. And don't think the things that we think are costly to the Iranian regime. So we talk about all these economic incentives as though these are a great thing. Are they great to an Iranian regime? Having, foreign firms coming in and invest, having lots of trade with the West, that has been a very controversial and fraught issue inside this regime. And so I wouldn't assume that Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, Ahmad Vahidi, and people like this will take the same view of those issues that, say, former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif or former President Hassan Rouhani did in 2015. I don't think that's at all guaranteed.
Thank you. Ali, you mentioned the Lebanon-Israel talks, and as I ask you questions, I'm trying to weave as much from the audience questions. The change we've seen over the last 48 hours is Lebanon is effectively now on the table between Iran and the United States. On the one hand, advocates of that decision say, well, you can't solve anything related to Hezbollah and to Lebanon without going to Iran, so you might as well do it publicly. But on the other hand, the opponents are saying it undermines the whole strategy of strengthening the Lebanese state and giving it its sovereign decision. How do you see the inclusion of Lebanon in these talks as perhaps speeding up or delaying a ceasefire in the South?
Well, Joyce, to be practical and to be, let me say, realistic, the war in Lebanon was never about Lebanon, and it was always about the regional standoff. I mean, the war between Iran and the United States on one side, and between Iran and Israel on the other side, recently, especially this last chunk. So to solve this problem right now, we're not dealing with a Lebanese question. Rather, we're dealing with a far broader question. Because let's assume that the Lebanese government reaches a deal with Israel. How much is it capable of imposing this deal on Hezbollah if this deal doesn't really meet the regional interests of Hezbollah and Iran? It's going to be very difficult, because over here Hezbollah is, and I've been always saying this, it's an organic extension of the Wilayat al-Faqih doctrine. And it's part of a regional alliance, of an axis. And this war right now is part of the Axis's war, of the Axis's war, a defensive war. Okay, I mean, Israel and America are the ones who attacked Iran. It's not Iran that started the war. But at the end, this is part of this war. So to solve this war, you need to have the right people talking, negotiating, and pushing for the plan. The Lebanese government says there is a ceasefire. Will Hezbollah abide by the ceasefire? But if Iran and the United States agree on a ceasefire, without any doubt, Hezbollah will abide by the ceasefire, because this is part of the regional. And actually, over here, I think there is something very complicated that Iran will face, given the Lebanese situation. Because now, as I've been telling you, the possibility of, for example, Lebanon and Israel reaching a deal at the time that there is already an American-Iranian deal, the intersection of deals over here could lead to a kind of an understanding that will remove Lebanon of this situation and could neutralize the Lebanese front. Neutralizing the Lebanese front in case of a future war on Iran will make it very complicated for Hezbollah to rejoin a war. So on one side, one of the objectives that Israel and the United States have on their list, which is removing the Lebanese front from this war, could be achieved diplomatically and by Iranian hands, not only by Lebanese-Israeli hands. So
But
over here,
are
it's
you
very
saying
interconnected.
are you saying that Iran could agree to neutralizing the Lebanon front?
No, it's not that they could agree or could not, but what's the choices they have? If
But
they
I
are
mean,
on the table right now
it
and they
hasn't
want to stop the
worked.
war in Lebanon. Yeah, but for now, for example, today, it's working relatively. Yani today, the Israelis are in their positions. Hezbollah is in their positions. Today, there was a little skirmish. I think the Israelis
Mhm.
killed 2 Lebanese or 3 Lebanese civilians. Hezbollah responded with a statement. We don't know if Hezbollah is going to retaliate militarily. This is something else. But now I think the ceasefire is holding to the most. I mean, still we have some relative breaches, but they are very, very minimal. So the main ceasefire is there. It's holding. Why it's holding? Because it's a deal between America and Iran on Lebanon. But what next? This is the big question. It continues to be a very big unknown. How this front is going to react in case there is a renewed war on Iran, in case Israel decides to kill Mustafa Khamenei at a moment, will Hezbollah be able to retaliate? I mean, I think this should be something that we should think of because this could come at any time.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I hadn't, I mean, so you're basically saying the status quo now in Lebanon could hold in a way that Hezbollah is a little bit undermined, and then the state, with the help of the US, with the push, for the Lebanese army to take over these pilot zones,
Pilot zones, yeah.
could reach some understanding with Israel that will be the new normal.
Well, if Israel withdraws from Lebanon, I think Hezbollah will be cornered. Yani, they don't have really much pretext to be part of any future war.
Well, I mean, the withdrawal happened in 2000, but then they said there is Shib'a farms that now the Syrian president is saying, well, we may have part of this. But I mean, they're not short of pretexts.
No, but today is not 2000.
Okay.
It's not 2000. There's no Syria. It's a different Syria.
Okay.
And it's a different Lebanon.
Yeah, no, these are very important points. Ari, I want to go to you on to look a little bit in this war. It's what Ali mentioned earlier. Iran reinvented, or not reinvented, is just went full war with its playbook. I think they've hit every GCC state. And they're ready to do so again. They've hit Iraq. So what do you make of that? It's a brazen behavior. At the same time, it's been, one can argue it's been rewarded. They've gotten what they want out of it. Is this a new national security strategy for Iran? Do we expect it to just resume later if the deal is not to their liking?
Look, I don't think it's new. I think it's the doctrine. I think, this is a doctrine that Iran had been curating and perfecting and really thinking about how to implement for decades, ever since the end of the Iran-Iraq War in the late 1980s. I do agree with a point that Mike made at the very beginning about the Strait specifically, and I think that's true in some other areas, which is that we had the contours of what they would do. We didn't know exactly how they would do it. And some of those things have been surprising in this conflict, including how they went about closing the Strait. We all knew that they were going to close the Strait. We didn't know exactly how. And frankly, it ended up being a bit more creative and more tailored and therefore, as Mike mentioned, a bit more difficult to respond to than we had anticipated. That said, I won't give a pass to the administration for seeming completely like deer in a headlight after it all happened, with the president saying, who knew they were going to do this? Everyone knew they were going to do this. Like anybody who's been paying attention to this issue said would have known it. I agree that the how was going to be a challenge. Likewise, you're correct that they have targeted every single GCC state. I think this is something that they had been preparing for. I think this is another classic case of Iran, though, maybe overplaying its hand a little bit, where they went all in and decided that they were even going to target Oman, a partner who has facilitated negotiations in the past for Iran, who has actually been a good friend to Iran. And, I think that in the course of the conflict, they became a bit too eager to raise the cost of the conflict for others around them. And this is something straight out of the playbook, right? That they've typically tried not to. If it was always going to be that if Iran were to be attacked directly, it would not stay contained to Iran, that Iran would try to spread out the cost of it for its neighbors so that they would use their leverage with the United States, their influence with the United States to get the United States to pull back. And I think, it's done that on some level successfully. However, that's true in the short term in that it's essentially perhaps increased pressure on the administration to end the conflict, although that's probably one of many factors, including the midterms and other things that have price of gas that have led the president to make the decisions that he's made. I do think that in the long term, Iran is probably going to look back, and the region is going to look back at this as something that is actually making, that is going to make things a lot more complicated for Iran. Ultimately, it does need to live in that neighborhood with those neighbors, and the more it lashes out against them, the more challenging it's going to be for it to be able to use their help when it needs it, and it inevitably will, at some point.
Mm. And I want to follow up on that with Mike. Mike, for Gulf states that have been hit, especially the UAE, had been hit the hardest in retaliation. What options they have? It feels like a hostage situation. Their model, their economic models are very different from Iran. They don't wage asymmetrical wars the way that Iran does, and skillfully so. So where does that leave these countries, as trade hubs, as connective cities? And I would like you also to comment on what Ali mentioned, Israel as the elephant in the room here, the potential for Netanyahu or, somebody else who comes later as prime minister to Bennett or Gadi or somebody else to just sabotage this deal. Where do you see that?
Look, on the Gulf states, I maybe have a slightly sort of contrarian attitude on this, in that I think they come out far better than Iran from this conflict. I think they have big questions. Questions, for example, about their security relationship with the United States, I think, which proved to be a mixed bag for them in this conflict. But when you look at how Iran operated, Iran did fire at all of these countries. I think under the assumption that they were weak, under the assumption that they would, go running to Washington and say, you must end this war. But that's not what any of them did. They proved a lot more resilient, I think, than most observers thought they would be, and certainly more resilient than Iran thought they would be. And the conundrum that Iran has is that for Iran to benefit from this deal requires first a deal, and then it requires calm and so on and so forth for Iran to be able to sell its oil and have any hope of, say, foreign investment. But if you're a foreign company and you're looking at the Gulf, Iran is still going to be the last place that you're going to choose to invest. You're going to choose the UAE. You're going to choose Qatar. You're going to choose Saudi Arabia to invest in because they have made themselves, very, very much the sort of better places, more attractive places to invest, to live, and so on and so forth. And it turns out that they are a lot, sort of more resilient than the Iranians thought they were. In fact, we learned sort of belatedly during the war, they even conducted offensive operations in Iran. I would argue those offensive operations were actually far more effective than Iran's own attempt at offensive operations across the way. Iran was good at sort of, blowing a few things up. But I think for the number of missiles and drones that it fired, it wasn't very effective when it came down to it. And so there's a risk of sort of exaggerating what Iran was able to accomplish. What Iran, I think, had sort of going in its favor, so to speak, was that the stakes were much higher for Iran. I think Iran started, the regime started this conflict feeling as though its survival was at stake. I think everyone else was just hoping it would be short so that they could get back to business as usual. And that is often what troubles the United States and other such states in these types of conflicts. Is that not that we're somehow less powerful. We're obviously far more powerful than Iran, but the stakes are so much lower for the United States than they are for, say, the Iranian regime, whose very survival is at stake. This is kind of the asymmetry in all these types of conflicts, whether it's with North Korea or Iran or others. And what we forget about when we talk about escalation dominance, it's not just about capability, it's about will as well. But I think the Gulf states are actually far better placed than Iran to benefit from stability in the Gulf. On Israel, look, I think that the U.S.-Israel relationship is in a tough spot right now, not just because of this recent conflict, but obviously because of, popular attitudes in the United States, stemming both from the Gaza war, but then also from this kind of, sort of incipient sense of isolationism or restraint in the United States, which has, affected all relationships, all alliances, broadly speaking. But I think that when you look at the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship compared to others, it's still, I think, starting at a much, much higher level than other relationships. When you think about this conflict itself, is not going to go down as a resounding victory, but you look at the way that the U.S. and Israel operated together, that's not something we can do with, frankly, I think just about any other partner in the world in the same way, not because of an absence of will, although in many places there is an absence of will, but because you don't have the combination of capability and will together. And so Israel has this sort of battle experience, capabilities, will to act within the region, which if you're a sort of great power like the United States looking to shift burdens, that's going to be the first candidate for doing so. So I tend to look at this episode as kind of a short-term episode, whereas the long-term trend between the U.S. and Israel remains one of very close cooperation and partnership for the most part. Remember, there's a new memorandum of understanding coming between the U.S. and Israel, too, not just between the U.S. and Iran, which will talk about transforming the defense relationship into one which is much more a relationship, a partnership, co-production, joint research and development, and so forth. So I think that relationship will deepen. I think yeah, go ahead.
In the coming weeks, in the coming months, do you see Netanyahu just going, like as he hit Beirut, doing something in Iran that would just sabotage this deal?
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel have a tightrope to walk. They want to show, of course, that they have agency, that they are a sovereign state that's making their own decisions about their national security. On the other hand, I think that the U.S.-Israel partnership is actually a core pillar of their national security. And for Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular, having sort of, really relied so much on his relationship with President Trump, well, he can't easily change direction now. And so I do think that there's going to be constraints on Israeli decision making. I do think that the U.S. is firmly in the lead on these issues, which isn't to say that Israel won't take independent choices and actions, but I think they'll have to first consider sort of what the U.S. reaction is likely to be, consider American policy, and so forth. At least, during this period of U.S.-Iran negotiations, while the U.S. is so focused on these issues.
Okay, Ali, I want to go to you, Ali, in the bus. I want to go to you with two questions. I'm going to try to blend them together from the audience on the Shia community in Lebanon. Do you see them abandoning, do you see the community abandoning Hezbollah? I mean, especially, I don't know, I'd add my own interpretation with Iran now, getting some financial cushion, some, release of 6 billion, the reports are saying, in frozen assets. Would this make it harder for the community to just abandon Hezbollah, and then how actually that the follow-up will go to Mike or Ari. How will these billions be released, and how will the money is likely to be invested? But Ali, on the Shia community, if you can briefly.
Well, Joyce, realistically, now most of Shia houses in Lebanon have one or two people killed. Or their houses are hit or destroyed. Either cities are completely destroyed. So the issue here is a bit complicated when it comes to how the Shia community sees Hezbollah. And what adds to this complication is how the other side in Lebanon views the Shia. Because the days this community, the Shia community, was internally displaced, in several areas they were faced with rejection. This rejection has its own impact also. The way also that the rhetoric was being built, especially, let me say, by the right in Lebanon, the right wing in Lebanon, regarding especially those who were saying that the Shias should be removed and taken to Iraq or Iran. I know this is not come from credible voices, but at the end, these voices were heard deeply in the Shia community. Also, hearing that there is a possibility Syria might get into Lebanon, and this is not now only being said. Now, President Trump is saying this, but during the war and before the war, just after President came to power, everyone was feeling this warning that there is a possibility that Syria will come for a revenge from the Shia Lebanese. So what's happening is that the Shia are feeling that they are facing an existential threat. Their own very existence is being threatened. And to them, Hezbollah is the only defender, regardless if Hezbollah is weak, if Hezbollah is serving their interest, if Hezbollah was the reason of their misery now or not. But the only party or the only movement that is capable or has weapons to defend their existence is Hezbollah. I think the dilemma for the Shia community, even those Shia who do not have any ties to Hezbollah, who could hate Hezbollah, at the end, they are facing this Shia phobia in Lebanon. And this is creating a lot of bad feelings. And I know many friends who are against Hezbollah, completely against Hezbollah, and they're Shia, but now they don't know what to do. They do not feel that they belong to that rhetoric on the other side, because that rhetoric is kind of threatening their existence. And at the same time, they do not feel that Hezbollah represents them, but they cannot go out and say we are against Hezbollah because they see that the other side is, you get me? It's interconnected in a very difficult way. Now, with respect to Iran and whether Iran can get them I think this is the best opportunity for the Lebanese government to step in, to the Lebanese government to try make the Shia community feel that they are part of this country and part of this whole fabric. Because the moment this is going to happen, I think, yes, to see a different direction. You hear different voices, but at the end, these people, they need someone to defend them. They need someone to be able to adopt and take of their concerns. Until the moment, there is no one taking care of their concerns, except feeling that Hezbollah is the one who defends.
Even we would say, a much less not as charismatic or capable leadership at Hezbollah is doing so. With Naim Qasim, he's nowhere where Hassan Nasrallah was, and the heavy cadres of the party are just no longer there. Is it?
Well, regardless, is that the situation with respect to the leadership on, let me say, the rhetorical level, but right now they're dealing with day-to-day challenges. The day-to-day challenges is what, right now there is, yes, a very huge gap in communication between Hezbollah and the people, between Hezbollah and the grassroots, between Hezbollah and its own support base, not between Hezbollah and others. That's another issue. But between Hezbollah themselves, there is a gap. But regardless of this, see that they do not have any other choices. They're left without this. And that's why right now there is a kind of a trend among the people who support Hezbollah or people who are within the group to take responsibility. They just go and talk on the social media. They try to talk to people. They try. This is because of this of communication that the master communicator of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, built that gap and created all that situation in the past. He's not there anymore.
Mm. We are already at time, but I want to very quickly go to Ari and Mike with two very just lightning questions. Ari, what is next for Iran on the inside? Where do you see this is headed in 20 seconds? And Mike, I'm just gonna throw the question: what is next if no deal is reached? Do you just see continued extensions of the ceasefire?
Geez, Joyce. Wow. I mean, if I had the answer, you would have to pay me a lot of money. I don't have the answer. I do think that I'm generally not as optimistic as I was maybe a few months ago about the trajectory of the country. I am concerned for all the reasons we've laid out that this is a regime that is more coherent, as Ali mentioned, and coherent on a more hardline side that is going to continue that repression. And it is going to, get some level of legitimacy and some breathing room from the deal that it's striking here with the administration. So I'm unfortunately fairly skeptical and fairly pessimistic about where it's going, at least in the short to medium term.
Mike?
Look, I think the null hypothesis has to be that this initial transaction, reopening the strait for economic incentives, basically is both the first and last deal that the Trump administration will reach with Iran, and that it will, largely kind of hold this way now for some time into the future. I tend to think that, look, it's the Trump administration will try to pursue this final deal. Hopefully they will get something which advances American interests. But if not, I think we need to think much more in terms of our policy in the region and not just about a deal with Iran. What is the future of our relations with the Gulf states? What's the future of our defense posture? How can we build up sort of our friends in the region? How can we take advantage of some of the opportunities which are there, like in Syria, maybe between Israel and Lebanon, maybe sort of elsewhere in the region, rather than only focusing on sort of this negotiation with Iran, which may or may not go anywhere, frankly.
Thank you all, guys. This was great. Thank you so much. Ali, be safe. We'll be reading you, following you. Ari, enjoy Chicago, and I hope to see you in DC when you're here next. Mike, see you around. Thank you all. And for those who joined us, please follow Al Monitor reporting, newsletters, and subscribe to our subscription. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.